Hey,
Hello.
What's going
There's the
on?
code number. How we doing?
We're here. Well,
We
not
are
all in the
here.
same place, but we're all here.
Well, Matthew had to go one up us again. We all been working on our background, making it look super pretty, and then you had to go and do that.
Got to get in the mountains for a little while, have some nice background for the videos. The only reason I came out here.
Mountains are calling, and I must go.
I'm still not convinced it's a real background. I think it's
It
still
does
like,
look
think
kind
if
of
the-
like one of those Zoom things you can put in the background.
I think if the wind blows enough, we're gonna end up seeing like the backdrop just fall over, and he's gonna be sitting in front of like the desert.
Something like that. It's my normal backdrop if I went outside.
Well, you want to tell the viewers where you are, or is it top
Yeah, so
secret?
I'm not too far from David. I'm in Silverthorne, Colorado, the Lake Dillon area, just up the mountain above Lake Dillon. So I'm here for a family reunion type thing with my mom's side of the family. Last year, my grandmother turned 80, and we were supposed to come out to Estes to celebrate her birthday, but it didn't work out for everyone's schedules. So now we're celebrating her 81st birthday out in Estes starting tomorrow. So we're going to be with her, and I haven't seen her for a while, so it'll be good to be with the family and spend a few days there. Then I'm head back next week to Arizona. Nice, beautiful desert.
Awesome. Well, Matthew can't get enough
115
of
degrees
Colorado.
versus I think like 75 today here.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I bet the mornings are stunning.
It is.
Well, for those who end up watching on the podcast, because we are turning this into a podcast, Matthew has a glorious view of looks like some pine trees back there and some mountains, and just a fantastic day sitting outside on the deck. So we won't keep you too long. I think he's running off a hotspot, so if he does just disappear, don't take it personally. It's his internet. It's not the conversation and the guests. We hope. So, welcome to Books and Bourbon, episode 12, I believe this is.
It is 12.
We are at an even dozen, so 12 straight weeks, pushing 3 months. For those that aren't into the golf world, I'm sorry. We're going to talk golf just for a second. It's not golf and Books and Bourbon, but the Open, formerly known as the British Open, is going on right now. So that's a really fun place to see. For those that saw, it might have been episode 7. I actually was coming to you from St. Andrews, which is the site of the Open this year. And I really wish I was back, but it was so cool to walk around that city, to play the golf course, and then to see that on TV. So I'm definitely geeking out. And if I start to look droopy and tired, it's because I was up stupid early watching because of the time change. So I will be going to bed early, getting up early, trying to act like Matthew. And we do have the third member of our whatever this business triangle partnership thing is, but David is in as well. Our crew. We'll go with crew. Well, for those that aren't familiar with the format, we'll kind of jump right in. What you can expect today is something a little bit different. I guess this is probably the second we've done where it's just internal. It's just the IQ team, or IQ2 as we like to call it, since the app refresh, and plenty more coming there. But we're gonna talk some business ideas. We're gonna move away from our traditional interview style just for today. Next week we'll have some interviewees. I've got a couple lined up. For those that called in, I did a couple of drive time. So I did 15-minute calls with probably close to 25 of you over the last week, and that was really fun. Matthew, I didn't share this, but remember the Gary V giveaway we did?
Yeah.
We did those.
What do we call that? What was that called?
I was
the name we gave the boxes. Darn it, now I'm forgetting it.
I could probably dig one up. I probably have one floating around. Actually, I got one right here. Let me grab it.
We gave away 100 scanners in a Gary V episode one time. Boxes with helping. There we go.
It is. So it's the reseller starter kit. We gave 100 of these away in honor of Reezy's 100th episode. Is with Gary V. These were kind of cool. We gave like a 3 months to the ScoutIQ. Gave some Scotty peelers, gave some barcode scanners, some Opticons, which was really nice. And I actually talked to somebody that got started reselling because of that giveaway. They got the scanner and jumped in, and that was really cool. We sent 100 out into the universe. There was a gal, Olga, I think, down in Florida that we met in person. She came up to one of the events. And then this fellow out of St. Louis was the second one that I ran into. So that's pretty cool.
That's really cool to hear that.
who are we gonna have on for our show for our 100th?
Oh man, I can't even think of 100. We're gonna have so many gray hairs by then.
100 weeks. That'd be what, like just under 2 years in if we did it every
under
single
2
week.
years. Maybe Bezos will still be around and would humor us.
We'll have a really good guest for our 100th episode.
Right. You heard it here first. Well, for those that aren't familiar with the format, we traditionally do an interview. We're going to have a little bit of a business discussion today. It may get a little heady. We'll try and keep it practical, but the idea is we're going to get into the concept of margins and risk and how understanding your numbers. You guys know that we're super into numbers, maybe in an unhealthy way at times, but understanding your numbers can help you and guide you in your business, but also really guide you in your decision making. So we'll get to that in just a second. We kick these things off with a little bit of a market overview. And for those that didn't see last week, the media mail rates changed. I believe that was on July. Actually, it would have been this week. I think it was Monday, July 11, I believe they kicked off. So if you haven't updated your triggers yet, we did that for everybody automatically on ScoutIQ, push those through the wonders of the cloud. But if you haven't, check out the Facebook group, check out your email, or you can comment and we'll dig it up. But the rates did change, and no, they did not go down. Things tend to not go down in price. So that's kind of it, just in terms of an update. Unless you two have anything else to add, I don't think there was anything else.
I was just going to riff off that, Caleb. Do you remember 1 year? I think it was like, were you selling 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago?
I was, and I was actually doing merchant fulfilled back then when I first got started.
There was a year where the USPS actually reduced certain services by, it was just a few percentage points. Do you remember that vaguely?
Like reduce the price?
Yeah, reduce the price on like 1 or 2 services, but raise it on the rest. I think it was like, gosh, I want to say like, I feel like it was media mail or like first class flats or parcels or something that dropped down 2%, but everything else went up 5-6%.
So they threw us a bone just to get us on the other side of it, huh?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But I do vaguely remember at least one time where they dropped the rates a little bit. But yeah, usually they go up 5% every year.
Yeah, it tends to happen. Costs, they still lose a lot of money for those that follow the post office. It's not, I mean, it is a government run entity, but it's not completely government run. There's some oddities there, but they tend to just bleed cash to the tune of a couple billion a year, if memory serves me correctly. So yeah, raising the rates hurts. It's not great, but yeah, at least they're still in business, which is nice. So that's a little bit of a market update. We are going to talk about what we're drinking. It is called Books and Bourbon. Again, we do have a couple people bugging us that we should talk more about what books we're reading. So maybe we can have a segment on that soon. But in terms of bourbon, we have a little bit of bourbon and then mostly business and book discussion. I am on a little bit of a health kick right now. I'm in the home stretch of another bet. Dave and I tend to make bets with Michael out of Franklin Media. And Dave, you and I still owe him a trip. We still need to go down and buy him dinner, and I think take him to Topgolf was our bet. So we do need to make that happen. Otherwise, he's going to just start charging us interest on that. So him and I are engaged in a health bet, and that culminates in 2.5 weeks. So I'm on the home stretch. I will be drinking water today. I had bourbon last week, so we did reset the counter. I do have a bottle I picked up in Arkansas. It's a Garrison Brothers Honeydew. There's a big trend toward honey, and I tend to have a sweet tooth for like caramel and vanilla and honey and whatnot. So when I am back off the health kick, I will be popping this bad boy. And Garrison Brothers is out of Texas. It's an 80 proof, so it should be very, very drinkable. Not as hot as some of the other ones, and I look forward to popping that one later. But for now, it's me and a glass of water.
Nice.
Are you trying to hit like a certain weight, or are you doing running, or what are you doing for the health thing?
It was based on weights, although we've been doing, I think I was sharing, I don't know if I shared it on the pod last week, but doing some blood analysis. I've just been doing a lot of just health stuff this year. It's kind of been my key word for the year, trying to spend and invest in health while I'm still somewhat young and trying to take advantage of that. So we do have a number we're trying to get to. I'm less concerned with the number, more concerned with energy, but for the bet, we put a number on it. What's interesting is we didn't do a competition. It's not who loses the most pounds or the most percentage of body weight. The bet is, can we both get to our goal? And we actually booked a little getaway to the Grand Canyon, which I've never been to. And here's the way the bet works, and I think it's pretty cool just in terms of accountability. If Michael does not hit his weight, but I do, we don't get to go on the trip, and vice versa. So we both have to do it, in order for us to take the trip. If not, then Matthew, you're going to get a call and you can go in my place. And Michael's
donatable or
yeah, it is tradable, and Michael's assistant is going to go instead, or his business partner James, for those that may know him. So I think they're pulling for us to fail, but we are both pretty close. We're in the home stretch. We're going to make it happen. So kind of a fun bet, because if it's just me, I don't really care if I hit it or not, but I don't want to let him down and miss out on that trip. So that's what we're up to. What are you drinking, Matthew?
So I didn't bring bourbon on vacation with me, but I did pick up while I was here a Breckenridge Brewery vanilla porter. I haven't had one of these in a long time. But
those are so good.
I love Breckenridge Brewery. I love their sample packs. Normally this is what Joy has, but I do like the vanilla porter. So I grabbed one of these, and it's actually perfect right now for just sitting outside, enjoying a nice beer. It's good.
Yeah, they are delicious.
I was going to say, it looks beautiful up where you are, and down here in Denver, it's like 100 degrees. It's like the warehouse, all the guys are like sweating. I've got AC in here, which is nice, but
you have all the fans going full blast in the warehouse.
Yeah, we've got all the fans going full blast, and it is hot. Speaking of hot, I am drinking a nice, delicious cup of hot coffee. Had a Trader Joe's instant coffee. Yeah.
Nice.
He's got it.
The usual.
Dave, do you have an announcement for us? Trevor Gates says, "Good afternoon from Manitoba, you bunch of hardworking dads." So I know Matthew and I are dads. Do you have something you want to share with everybody?
Yeah, guys, I am pregnant.
Did not expect that. You heard it here first on episode 12 of Books and Bourbon.
Yeah.
So that'll conclude the bourbon section. We're going to jump into the interview, and this is something I get pretty passionate about, not just numbers, but the idea of managing your margins, managing risk. And so I love it in the personal finance side of things. I think it's incredibly important when you get into business, but the two tend to be correlated and overlapping quite a bit. I think it's pretty rare to find someone that's pretty good at business and just sucks at the personal finance side of things. And the same thing, vice versa. Business, you have to do a lot of things well. It's not just a numbers game. You've got to be, you got to have some selling ability. You got to have some marketing ability sometimes. And you have to certainly be able to run the business like a business. But when it comes to personal finance as well as business, I think understanding numbers, setting up the metrics properly, and then just understanding a little bit of how it relates to risk. And actually, it's kind of a microcosm of how we set up eScore and the way that we set up the triggers. So we'll kind of tie that in. If triggers are new to you, if eScore is new to you, we'll kind of go into a little bit of an analysis. I do have some spreadsheets, I do have some charts, and I do have my stylus and handy iPad. So we will dive in, and Matthew and David's role is to help make sure this is relevant and practical. And if people's eyes start to glaze over from this junior college lecture, then we will shift gears and get it going back again. So raking profits in the house, which is awesome. Glad to see you here, buddy. He was going to come visit me. I think he had a COVID scare, and so chickened out on that trip. But Steve, you're welcome back anytime. We'd love to have you out in Indiana. David and Matthew love it here. It's kind of an undiscovered hidden gem in the middle of the Midwest. So
it is.
Come on back out. We'll get a good excuse to do that. So anything you two want to say as it relates to risk and margin, or just personal finance before we jump in?
So when you brought up the topic of risk and margin and how it relates in business and life, it sort of got me really thinking. And Caleb, you talk about this a lot. You talk about like woodshed moments where you come across a point in your business where it's kind of a make it or break it, or really changes the course or the trajectory of where you're going. And when I think back, like for me at least, and my business, like some of the most pivotal moments where I had to make a decision, that's when I felt the most risk, right? And I guess I'm curious to see how this conversation goes, but one of the things that I realize is like risk is totally something to manage. It isn't something to avoid. And risk can be very powerful as long as again you're managing it correctly. And so that's just kind of a reflection that I had leading up to this pod. So.
Perfect. And then Matthew, I know you and I talk quite a bit, especially in person. It was easier when we lived in Colorado together, but we talk about personal finances quite a bit, what your goals are, your family goals. Anything you're curious about or you're interested in diving into as we jump into this discussion?
Yeah, this is something, well, even just since we started the sound check this episode, that it got me kind of thinking about is this quote. I don't know who said this quote. I just read it yesterday. I know I've heard it many times in the past, but it says, if you sweat in peace, you won't bleed in war. So basically, the act of doing hard things when you don't need to, that way when the time comes you actually need to, you're prepared for doing that. I think a lot of that has to do with personal finance and business. You're going to have opportunities that present themselves in business. If you haven't done the hard work up front of getting your finances in order, your family's finances, your business finances, you're not going to be able to take those opportunities. The Outliers book, what's the Malcolm Gladwell? Is that his Outliers? Malcolm Gladwell, right? Yeah. Is all of the, every time I read Outliers, I've read it a few times, just reminds me of how many times these people had amazing opportunities and they're in a position they could take advantage of that opportunity. And a lot of times, if you're not managing your finances properly, if your finances aren't in order, you're going to have opportunities present themselves in your business that you're not going to be able to take. And so it's important now, when you don't have those opportunities sitting in front of you, to get your finances in order so that you can actually take advantage of that more. And that's something I'm trying to do. We can talk about that more as we go along with this in my personal finance, of tracking that better and doing better, of managing my finances. So when it relates to those bigger opportunities that present themselves, investment opportunities, etc., I'm in a better position to take advantage of those.
Awesome. Well, one of the big things too is, again, it's very cliche, but you don't know what you don't know. And I've learned a lot about personal finance. There's still a lot of things I have yet to figure out. It was cool. On the way back up this week, I met with our developer business partner, so our mysterious fourth business partner that likes to go unnamed. But I met up with him. We had a great conversation. Same thing. So just how do you set up your family for success? How do you plan for big ticket items, and just how do you set up the systems? There aren't really any great, we're going to talk about bank accounts again, but there's not great bank accounts that allow you to really automate your finances. I saw an ad for another one, and I'm a sucker for new banks. Maybe our next business venture will be a bank, but that sounds like a crowded space with a lot of things that could go wrong. But it's really interesting to try and automate as much of this as possible. So one thing, you don't know what you don't know. So you want to talk to people that have been there, that are further along in life, that have more money, that have dealt with risk. And I guess we should just define our terms as we jump in. So what is risk? I just looked it up on the Oxford Dictionary. Risk is literally just a situation involving exposure to danger. Or the way I like to think about it is, risk is the likelihood or the probability that something goes bad or wrong. So it's not, we played the game Risk as kids. It involves dice. Gambling is risk. There's numbers involved. We know what the risks are. And living is a risk, right? One of the biggest risks that we have as Amazon sellers is exposure to Amazon Sandbox. They can change the game at any given time. I know, I don't lose sleep over it all the time, just maybe, once a month. But there's that risk. And even with our software, Amazon could pull our developer credentials at any time, right? And that's the risk that we have. Now, the percent of that happening is probably really low. The percent chance that any one of us get our accounts removed or completely, rescinded or destroyed are low, but it is a risk. So the idea is, how do you understand risk as it relates to finances, to the numbers, and then it can kind of help you make decisions as well. We've got Muse Band. I don't know who this is, but just got 100% out of debt. I feel like we should do a Dave Ramsey debt-free stream or something, but congrats.
Well,
Your name, but thanks for the time to stream. That's awesome. Phenomenal. And as you're out of debt now, whatever, I don't know what that was, whether it was student debt, credit card debt, mortgage, house, whatever, if you can keep applying that payment you were putting toward the debt and put that toward investments, et cetera, that would be awesome. He said he or she started selling books in 2020. So that's awesome. Hopefully Flipping Books helped you get out of debt. If that's the case, you should be a guest on one of our future shows. Yeah. So I'm going to share the iPad here. Let me get that up and running. And then I'm a terrible artist. Gonna half apologize in advance, but we will dive into this as well. They said, thanks for all the info. Credit card debt was a heavyweight for sure. So as it relates to risk and margins, as a general rule, I like to say the more margin you have, the more risk you can take. So for example, the stock market this year is down, I think about 30% on the year. For those that are watching, it's mid-July 2022. So the market's down quite a bit. If you panic and just sell everything, that means you have some cash ready to go. Or if you had margin all along the way, you'd have some cash ready to buy in. I don't know when it's going to stop. We're not here to talk necessarily about the stock market. But when there's opportunities, when things go on sale, if the housing market crashes as interest rates keep going, those that have cash, those that have had a margin for a while and built up a reserve will have the ability to go. For those that have heard me talk about this, there's one of my college professors, Dr. Stichter. He's a good friend. He's really into cycling. He actually bike cross country. I'm super jealous of him. But he has a book called Principle of Maximums, and it's really this concept. It's a bit dry. I keep saying that, but he is an accountant, and it's even drier than kind of some of the content that we do. I love Roger. He's awesome, but he is an accountant. So that's a really good book if you want to get started and just kind of understand what that is. But in general, most people, if this is just someone's income, just a bar chart, right? So if this is income, most people make this much, and then they are going to spend basically this much. This will be expenses. So most people live this way. They have very, very little margin. Or if we just kind of superimpose these charts over each other, their margin is going to be this green section right here. They have very razor thin margins. Most of Americans, the data shows anywhere between 70 and 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And that doesn't matter if you make $1,000 a week or $10,000 a week. Most people literally, they raise their standard of living to essentially meet or get really, really close to their income. And for those that have credit cards, a lot of us, that margin actually is negative. So they're going to actually spend more than they make. They're going to have a negative margin, which is not healthy at all. That's incredibly stressful. So a couple things you can think about is, one, how can you make more money? How can you raise the top line of this bar so that you have more margin? Or two, the other school of thought is, how can we trim back the fat, trim back the expenses? One thing we talk about in business is your overhead is your engine. That's how much gas it takes. So I have a warehouse. It's pretty cheap. It's in Indiana. I've got a sweetheart deal with a landlord. I pay $1,000 a month plus utilities to have access to that space. Then I've got a warehouse manager who manages the space. So I'm paying an hourly rate for him to be in there. So these overhead things, that's the cost of the engine. That's essentially the cost to fill. That's all your expenses in this chart, if you want to look at it that way. So the more you can trim back your expenses, the better. It gives you more margin. And the more margin you have, the more you can be risky, the more things can go away. So why is it a problem if you have tight margins in your personal finances? Let's start there. So let's say you make $5,000 a month, so 60 grand a year, but you spend $4,900 a month after everything, your mortgage, your food, everything. You just say, I don't really care about spending, and you only have $100 left over. Well, when your brakes go out in your car, when you hit something on the side of the road, you need new tires, and all of a sudden you get hit with a couple $100 bill. If you've only been able to set aside $100 a month as your margin, your reserve tank, or how much risk is there, that is going to get depleted quickly. Now you've got to tap into credit cards. Now you're kind of playing the game from behind. Versus someone that makes $5 grand a month and finds ways to actually only live on $4 grand. So their margin is going to look something like this. So option A, making $5 grand and only saving 100, you got very, very razor thin margins. Versus option B, making the same $5 grand, they don't have anything different, but they're able to stock away $1 grand a month. So that is the difference. And the bigger this chart can be, the bigger the margin can be, the better. Why? Again, just what we said, it gives you the ability to deal with risk. Risk is like, at some point you're going to need breaks, but you don't know if that's going to be a week from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now. And so being able to plan for that and have a little bit of room for slop, another word for margin is slop, that allows you to get ahead. All right. So again, the two schools of thought, and if you want to get into them, one is just trimming back the expenses. And you see people that are extreme couponers and they're cutting every corner they can. And that's phenomenal. But there's only so much you can save, right? And unless you're willing to just be crazy or live in your parents' basement or live in a tent or whatever, you're going to have cost to live. You can be really creative So our business partner, when we started ScoutIQ, was starting a different business as well. And he moved his family, although I don't know if he didn't have kids at the time. I think it was just him and his wife. They moved from Denver, which is expensive to live, and they moved to the backwoods of Missouri. They cut their costs incredibly. So he said, hey, I don't have a guaranteed income. We paid him a bit for ScoutIQ. We hoped it took off and did well. But he literally said, hey, I'm going to cut my expenses, remarkably so, and took that risk and went to a smaller market. Now, not everybody has that potential. Some people might say that's extreme, but he did that to cut way back to make sure he had margin, and that allowed him to take the risk of building ScoutIQ, working on his other project, which took off and did really, really well for him, which is awesome. And because he took that risk and cut back, that served him very well. The other school of thought, something that Ramit Sethi talks about, is raising your income. So you can cut costs. And a lot of people say, well, hey, if you avoid the $4 latte, or now it's $5 and $6 latte, depending on where you go. But if you can avoid the $4 latte 5 days a week, that's $20 a week times 50 weeks of $1,000. The other school of thought is to say, well, hey, if that latte is really important and makes you feel good and it's a great start to your day and you get to meet people at the coffee shop, then if that gives you joy and you don't want to cut it, that's fine. Find a way to make that $1,000 a year elsewhere. Well, flipping books is a great way to do it. Having a side hustle is a great way to do it. And so that's that's kind of a good way to do it. When you're cutting back costs, there's only so far you can go. You can only cut costs, down to a bare minimum. There really is no limit to how much you can raise your income. So when it comes to those two, I think trying to raise your income or have a side hustle or running your own business or having multiple streams of income is definitely a very, very good way to go. For those on Facebook, if you don't log in, Matthew, do you remember how to do that? We can see the
Yeah, there's a link right above this stream. It says click it for StreamYard. You can get permission so we can see who's leaving the comment. Otherwise, it just says Facebook user if you're on Facebook. YouTube shows whatever your name is.
Or Facebook user, as I like to say. But they say I prefer the abundance mentality, which I agree, not the scarcity mentality. And there's no one way, if you're going to save $1 or make an extra $1, both of those get you in the same spot. But I think the more you build those habits of learning to grow your income versus trying to grow your standard of living, that puts you in a really good spot. So that is the rough idea, just as it relates to personal finances. And again, the more that you kind of say, and the whole idea behind the principle of maximums is this, it is, figure out when you're in college or when you're a young adult, what is the standard of living you want to have? Well, I want to have a 3-bedroom home. I want to have a ½ acre of land. Like, you have these ideas. And of course, we don't know what costs are going to be. That was kind of a nebulous question to college kids. But the idea was, what is your standard of living, your potential standard of living? That was kind of a dotted line of, hey, someday I want to get to this level standard of living. Well, when you get your first job out of college, you might only be making this much money. So should you use credit card and ramp up and spend to where you want to be? Probably not. You might have to dial things back. One thing you can do is house hack. If you can get a mortgage, my first house was a duplex. I lived in half and rented the other half. That's a great way to keep your costs much lower than otherwise they could be. So what happens is Dr. Stichter really challenged us to, hey, go ahead and try and have as much margin as you can, but try and have some margin. And then as you get paychecks, so maybe you're 25 years old as your first job, maybe at 30, you've had a significant raise. Well, go ahead and raise your standard of living and try and get closer to where you want to be. Now, still try and have some margin, but we're working our way up. Where he really challenged us and said, hey, at some point, maybe you get a really good raise when you're 35. Doesn't always work this way. And you're exactly where you want to be. So you still have a little bit of margin. And then when you're 40, you get a crazy pay raise, and all of a sudden you have more money than your standard of living. Well, what Roger challenged us to do, he said, hey, when that happens, stop raising your standard of living. So don't raise this area here. And someone will probably make fun of my drawing later. That's totally fine. Don't raise this. Go ahead and leave it. And then over time, as your income continues to go up, leave this here. And now your margin continues to grow. And what he challenged us to do was, rather than raise that standard of living, raise your standard of giving. The other way you can do that is you can invest it. And hopefully that money, goes out and has other dollar children, as I think Kiyosaki and Ramsey like to call it. But put those soldiers to work. Let them keep making money for you. And that allows you to leave behind a legacy, to donate a lot more. And ultimately, it allows you to be stressful. So for those that are just starting out, maybe you don't make the money you want to make just yet. That's okay. You're maybe somewhere on this side of the equation. That's all right. The more margin you can try and squeeze out and build that habit into your life, the better. For those of you that your business is crushing it, things are going well, and maybe you're on this side of the equation, I would challenge you as best as you can. We talk to people that sell their businesses, and one of the best pieces of advice is don't go buy a boat. Don't go buy a fancy car. Don't just do it. Don't touch anything just yet. Same thing with professional athletes. They get that first big contract. They say, don't go change your standard of living, because once you raise it, it's really hard to squish it back down. It's really hard to go backwards. Just like media mail rates, we're going to go full circle here. Media rates aren't going down anytime soon, probably ever. And once your standard of living raises, it's hard to push that back down. So that's the personal finance side. We could geek out. We can get into that as much as we want later. I love talking about that. And I love setting up systems and trying to automate as best as you can. And Scott Taylor must be all over this, because you're talking about the FIRE movement, financially independent, retire early. You're mentioning Kiyosaki, talking Millionaire Next Door. So those are all great reads. Scott, we should probably chat sometime. Sounds like we are cut out of the same cloth. All right. So how does this relate to business? Let's talk about two things. Let's talk about margins. And actually, before I just keep yapping, Dave or Matthew, you got anything you want to chime in with, or just break up my monotony here?
No, you're doing good.
Okay. David agrees. All right. We're going to talk about margins. And then we're going to talk about return, ROI, return on investment, and why do these matter? And we won't get too much into the weeds, but margin is, let's say you sell a book for, we can use the same bar chart. Let's say you sell a book for $20. Your margin after Amazon's fees, if you sell at FBA, you're going to be left with about 10 to 12 bucks, probably closer to 10. So your margin's about 50% if you sell a book for 20 bucks. If you sell a book for $12, Amazon has pretty high fixed fees, and your margins are going to be significantly less. And you might only have margins of, let's say, 25%, maybe 20%. So as it relates to margin, the more expensive you can sell items due to Amazon's fee structure, the more margin you're going to have left. Okay. That's not the only thing that matters when it comes to business, but in general, if you can sell higher priced items, higher ticket items, you have more room for slop. Here's where it's going to get fun. We're going to get into ROI. ROI simply stands return on investment. So if you spend $1 on a book, so dollar buy cost, you put that on ScoutIQ, and let's say it's going to sell for $14 and you're going to make $3 back after all your expenses. That means you make $3 back from Amazon. $3 minus your dollar buy cost is $2 of profit, right? So 2 profit, that's your return. That's how much goes back into your bank account after everything, divided by the $1 buy cost equals 200% ROI. So books, it's really easy. You see people talk about 1,000% ROI or 1,500% ROI or 500%. Those margins are certainly out there because you're buying books for 25 cents, $1, $2, and it's not hard to turn $1 into 3 or 4 or 5 and start approaching those 3, 4, 500% margins. Well, why does the return matter? The return's incredibly important. I'm going to use numbers, then we'll bake it into a math formula if anybody cares. Let's say I buy 12 books at $1 each. So my total buy costs, seems like elementary math, is 12 bucks, right? So my total cost out the door is 12 bucks. If I have a 200% margin or return on investment, ROI, not margin, let's say ROI, then I need to sell how many books to break even? So that we're going to try and hammer home a point here. The higher your return, the higher the percentage of your return, the more risk you could take. And let's dial that in. So if you have a 200% ROI, that means for every book you sell, you're making $2, but you're actually getting $3 back. We need to sell 4 of those books, right? 4 books times $3 cash, ignoring the buy cost. We've already sunk that. So I need to sell 4 out of 12 or 1 out of 3. So I need to sell 1 out of 3 at 200% ROI to break even. If I'm doing 100% ROI, so every book makes me $1 profit or returns $2, I now need to sell 6 books, because 6 books times $2 returned to me after Amazon's fees is 12 bucks. So now I break even. I need to sell half my inventory to break even, which isn't that hard to do, but it's doable. What if I only have a 50% ROI? For those that do wholesale or private label, a lot of times you're targeting, especially in the wholesale space, you're targeting 20, to 30% ROI. 50% is pretty incredible based on those that I talk to. I know that higher returns are, of course, possible, but they're going to attract more competition. If I'm getting 50% ROI, so every book I sell, I net $1.50 or 50 cents of profit. I now need to sell $12. I'm doing the math in front of me here.
Right?
Books.
Say it again.
Never mind. Keep going.
Yeah, I need to sell 8. You're exactly right. So I need to sell 8 out of 12 just to break even, or 2/3 of my inventory. But what about a 20% ROI? So every book I sell brings back $1.20. Well, 12 divided by $1.20 is I need to sell 10 out of 12, or 5, 6, or 83%. So what you can see is if I have really high ROI, and let's just go crazy and say we have a 500% ROI. So every book nets me $6 minus the dollar buy cost is 5-to-1 return. If I have a 500% ROI, I only need to sell 2 out of 12, or 1 in 6, or 16%. So that's why ROI matters. If I have incredibly high ROI, then I can afford to take a lot of risk because I only have to be right 1 in 6 tries in this case. For those that want the formula, it's whatever the ROI is, take 1 divided by, and then in parentheses, 1 plus the ROI as a percentage. So if it's 500% ROI, it's 1 divided by 1 plus 5 equals 1 divided by 1/6, or 1/6, which is exactly what this was right here. So our math checks out. And if we're doing 20% ROI, it's 1 divided by 1 plus 1 point, or 0.2. So it's 1.2, and 1 divided by 1.2 is, oh, there we go. So that's how the math checks out. Well, Caleb, why does this matter? Well, the more sure you are about something, so if you've done your homework and you've done all your research and you've used Jungle Scout or Celery Amp, we'll tip our hat to our guest from last week, Miles. But if you're using these apps and do your homework really well and know that something is almost a sure thing, then you can go ahead and take a ton of risk. Because on a small ROI, if you're 99% sure it's all going to work out and you only have to be right 83% of the time, then odds are you're going to be good. Well, what happens if the price tanks? So we see people complain all the time in the Facebook groups. Hey guys, stop tanking prices. Well, we can't collude, we can't price fix, so be careful with that one. That's not a good thing to mess around with. But when it comes to that, if you have really high returns, if you're aiming at high margins, essentially, then you can afford to take a lot more risk. You can be a little more haphazard because you only have to be right 1 in 6 tries, 1 in 5 tries, versus trying to be right 5 out of 6 times. Okay, and that hasn't even talked about sell-through. The same principle essentially applies to sell-through, right? I need to sell 1 in 6 to break even. 2 in 6, I double my money. 3 in 6, I triple my money. So all of a sudden, I'm looking really smart. And if I can drop 10 grand into an investment with a really high ROI, then I don't have to be right that often in order to be really right, right? So that's kind of the concept of leverage. So we'll try and move away from numbers a little bit. How does this apply to business? Well, this is going to kind of turn into an eScore talk, but the idea is if I am really confident that something is going to sell, this is going to be our margins, and this is going to be our confidence. But confident, this is going to be low confidence, this is going to be high confidence. If we're pretty sure about something, i.e. if the eScore is like 180, for example, that means it's going to sell every single day. I can accept very, very low margins. Let's say this is like, 10 to 20 to 30% margins. I can accept low margins because the chance of it selling, my odds of selling through that material are incredibly high. Versus if an eScore is, let's say, 5, I'm not very confident it's going to sell quickly. And I need to then adjust and have very high margins and high ROI target relative to what my targets are when I have confidence other places. Does this concept make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
It does, yeah.
So again, going back to risk, if I don't know what's going to happen, and buying inventory is risky, there's no guarantee. The very definition of arbitrage means you've already sold it before you buy it, right? So it kind of applies to stocks. You can do it with day trading. We've got a piece of our business where we buy books for basically a wholesaler, but that wholesaler gives us a list. Think of them as like sell back your book, and Sellback says, hey, I will pay $12 for this book for the next 6 weeks. And I go, cool. I can acquire it over here for $4. And so I already have a buyer. Now I still have to wait and wait for Bill to check it in and pay me. but I have a guaranteed buyer at 12. So even if I could buy it at 11.50, I would still do it because I can still make money, and unless there's a high risk that sellback doesn't pay for it, for example. But that's true arbitrage. The reality is most of what we do, even if we buy it on eBay and sell on Amazon, or use eFlip and buy merchant fulfilled and sell FBA, there's no guarantee that it sells. Now, I know that the likelihood's high if the eScore is high and there's a good track record with Keepa of the book selling at high prices. But the higher the certainty, the more I know that it's going to sell, I can tolerate lower margins. So what does this look like when it comes to the Amazon world? Let me go back. This is going to be a throwback. David, you probably remember this, although you weren't on the team yet. This is a chart. Let me share it over time.
I'm really curious what this is going to be.
This is a chart that we did from our keynote presentation, which is really cool. And my brother Samuel's a math major, put this together, so you guys can see this. So this is before eScore existed. All we had to go off was rank. Well, rank is fuzzy because, again, a book can be ranked 1 million, sell one copy, drop to about 100,000, and then slowly work its way after 4 or 5 days and go back to 1 million. Well, the same thing's true of a book ranked 7 million. If it sells one copy, it's going to drop to roughly 100,000. It'll go back up quickly. It'll get back to 1 million in probably 2 to 3 days, and it'll quickly go back up because rank remembers. But if you found that book yesterday before it sold a copy and scanned it, and you were going to make $30, but the rank's 7 million, you would say no, thank you. If you scanned it literally the hour after it sold and the rank had adjusted down to 100,000 and the profit said $30, you would have bought 10 copies because you said this is almost a sure thing. So rank is misleading. And what this is when we came out with eScore, we were trying to explain it. Of course, we got really technical because that's what we like to do. Over here, we have rank, sales rank of 0. This technically should be 1 because 0 is really bad. It means it hasn't sold. But pretend this is 1. We've got 1 million, 2, 3, 4, 5 million over here on the x-axis or the left side. On the y-axis or the horizontal axis, now I'm blanking. I think those are the other way around. It's been a long time since geometry. But anyway, on the horizontal axis here, we've got eScore of 0, meaning it hasn't sold in 6 months, all the way up to 151 plus, which means it's basically selling every single day. Well, what we did is we took, I think, a random sample of, and I'd have to go back and look, but let's just call it 500 books for each section. So we took 500 books with an eScore of 1 to 2 and plotted those. So you can see they're all over the board. Some ranks are all the way up here close to 5 million, and they still have an eScore of 1 or 2, meaning they're selling every 2 to 3 months. Not often, but they're selling. It's kind of a low likelihood to sell, but they do sell. The average rank, or I think the weighted average rank here was about 3.5 million for an eScore of 1 to 2. But some of those books had just sold a copy, and they had a copy down around 100 to 200,000. A handful of books had sold a copy maybe a week ago and were roughly around 1 million. Another handful of books were in the 1 to 2 million range. And so what happens is over time they kind of drift back and get closer to their mean or their average rank, if you want to look at it that way. But there's certainly outliers. And so if you scanned this book the day after it sold and saw that the rank was 200,000 and the profit was $10, you would have bought it. Versus saying, hey, yes, the rank today is 200,000, but the eScore is only 1. Therefore, I need a higher profit. Now, when eScore is really high, you see there's really, really tight groupings. The risk is a lot lower because a book can't be ranked 2 million and have an eScore greater than 150. If it's selling every single day, that rank is typically going to be well under 1 million and often well under 100,000, usually closer to 100,000 than 1 million. And so you see a very, very tight grouping. There's no outliers. This 115 to 150 looks like a book stopped selling and started drifting up. But again, a very tight grouping, ignoring that one outlier. So why does this matter? What we did when we launched ScoutIQ is we said that eScore eliminated, I think he came up with 27% of the noise. Meaning rank alone, if you just looked at rank, it gave you a rough idea of how popular something was. But you could take a book ranked 1 million over here, and so many books are ranked about 1 million with different eScores. You could find a book ranked 1 million with an eScore of 80, for example, and you could find a book ranked 1 million with an eScore of 1. Well, those are very, very different. Rather than pulling a Keepa chart for every book or just buying the book and hoping you're right, that's exactly why we created eScore. It gives us a lot more certainty, and with more certainty allows us to take on more risk, and all of a sudden it's less risky because we know that a book with an eScore of 30, for example, is going to be selling, every so often, every couple of days, every roughly once a week, rather than, an eScore of like 1 that has the same sales rank. So that's why we did eScore. You'll see this slope is roughly the same as what I drew with my confidence interval. Over here on the right with a really good eScore, and I should have drawn the chart to match, but a really good eScore, we can accept very low margins, very low return on investment, because it's almost guaranteed to sell. Again, no guarantees in this business. It is an inventory game. So what does this mean in the real life? Let's look at some actual numbers then. Let me stop sharing. Let me share one more spreadsheet, and then we'll open it up to questions and switch gears a little bit.
I just like to take a screenshot, a clip of that video, and put that on the website for people who have questions about eScore, because that's like the perfect explanation right there of eScore. That was awesome.
Well, thank you. All right, so this is kind of fun, and this is older. So this is here's some books. Here's the date I listed it, and then I have how many days it was on the market before it sold, what the current rank is, what the rank was when I listed it, and then I also pulled eScore when I listed it. So this is all kind of sorted by eScore. We've got the ISBN. This is all stuff that's sold. I've got my SKU, which isn't that important. Kind of hide some of that. We've got Dr. Seuss. Should have waited and sold that one later after he got canceled, but that was back in 2016. So this is some older data, and I think I have about 30,000 data points. So this is actual books that have sold. I pulled sales rank and I pulled eScore. This is kind of fun to look at. So we know some of these data points. And so what I did is our trigger ranges basically look like this: 1 to 10,000, 10,001 to 50,000, etc. So I think I broke those off, maybe off trigger ranges, maybe just rough big numbers. And then we can kind of consolidate the rank to make it look pretty. And I looked at how many units I listed in each of these categories, how many of them sold, and what the percent sell-through rate was, or how many sold. Remember, if a ton of them sell, if 9 out of 10 sell, I can accept really low margins. And remember the ROI equation, we could probably work that formula backwards. But I could probably accept somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% margin, or return on investment rather, and still break even. Now, I don't want to break even. I want to make a profit. But as you would expect, books that have a really good rank sell through at a high level. What's interesting is books in the $500,000 to $1 million range. I had 7,000. That's where the meat of my book is. That's the most distribution of books. And of course, these are just kind of arbitrary rank ranges. But 7,000 books I had listed were between $500,000 and $1 million. And 59%, or roughly 60% of those books have sold. So what does that mean? If you're selling books and you have a 90% chance of selling the book, and usually pretty quickly, you can accept low margins. You might be fine accepting a profit of $1 or 50 cents or $1.50, whatever your lowest floor profit is. Versus up here in the 4 to 5 million range, I'm actually selling 1 out of 3 books that I list. Now, I'm not just listing any book. I'm only listing books with higher profit, because only 1 in 3 sells, or 32%. Well, all I have to do there is adjust my target profit. Say, hey, if I'm going to spend $1 up here, I'm happy to make 50 cents, or I'm happy to make $1, because it's almost a sure thing. Down here, it's only 1 in 3. That means at a bare minimum, if I'm happy with $1 up here, I need to be looking for at least $3, and probably a little bit more, because these books are going to sit longer on the market as well. So we mapped that out. We did the same thing with eScore. So we did percent sold based on eScore. We did percent sold based on rank, and they're very, very similar charts, right? So what's interesting, even with eScore of 0, I will take books in my inventory. I usually merchant fulfill those, but I'll take a book with an eScore of 0 as long as the rank is typically under 6, 8 million, unless it's just a phenomenal title that I think someone would want to buy. And I'm still selling at an eScore of 0, 1 in 3 of those books, right? And then we look at the sales rank, the drop off occurs once you get over 10 million. Between 10 and 20 million, I'm only selling, I've only listed 12, but I'm selling, that'd be like 8.5%. So what does that mean for your business? And then just for kicks, for those that love numbers, I actually adjusted the ranks and played with what is the sell-through rate to be perfect increments. So 90%, 80%, 70%. And so you guys might want to screenshot that. We can share this in the Facebook group later. But I did, you're going to sell 90% of your inventory if the rank's under 10,000. And again, it depends on your pricing. It depends on the market. There's a lot of things that play in. But in general, books ranked under 10,000, you should expect to sell 90% of them. Books in the 10,000 to 225,000 range, you should sell roughly 80%. 225,000 to 500,000, 70%. $500,000 to $1 million, 60%. $1 million to 1.3. It's a pretty tight range. Your sell through rate drops down. 1.3 million to 4 million, so a pretty big number. And again, eScore is going to help you with that as well. You can see the eScore equivalents to get to 40%. It's an eScore of 3 to 6. But you can kind of gauge this and make your decisions. So if you need to make $1 of profit here to justify it, it means your expected value, if you're aiming at $1 minimum, your expected value is actually only going to be to pull 90 cents on the dollar back out of the equation, right? So that's a really in-depth discussion, and we'll kind of come back up for air and talk about practicality here. But in general, and there shouldn't be anything groundbreaking about this, eScore removed a lot of the clutter just related to sales rank in general and helps you make better decisions. But in general, the more sure you are about something, you can accept lower profit margin. So that's why the triggers on ScoutIQ, I think the floor profit is between $1 and $1.50 on really good eScores, because they're almost sure to sell, and they're likely to sell at that price. You're not often going to have price degradation. Versus something that's got an eScore of 1 or 2, it's going to sit on the market. 1 and 3 will sell, but you're also going to sit on the market, whereas this stuff can sell quickly in a week or a month. This stuff might take 3, 4, 6, 8, 10 months on average to eventually become the next sale. So that's why it's important. And in general, as you're making those inventory decisions, that can allow you to kind of make your return on investment decisions, your floor profit decisions, etc. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. We're going to come back up for air. For those that your eyes just went cross-eyed, I apologize. Come back and watch this. I know I talk quickly, but you can slow that down. YouTube actually lets you adjust the speed. I like to speed things up, but I think you can lower it down and actually go. Can you go less than 1x?
You can do like 0.5, 0.75, and 1. So you can make it really, really slow. I always do everything at 2x speed. I can't listen to something at 1x speed anymore.
I know. I went back and listened to a Tim Ferriss podcast. I usually have him at 1.5 to 1.75 times speed. I went back and listened to him at 1x and was like blown away at how slowly he talked and how deliberate the words were.
Well, I think that's why I always listen to everything at 2x speed now, and I can't listen at 1 because the people I'm so used to listening to now seem so much more excited and enthusiastic about life at 2x speed. And you listen at 1x speed, and Joe Rogan sounds so dull, but 2x speed, he sounds super happy and chipper. It's just funny how that works.
There's a lot more energy there. Someone
can you guys
against this. Can you guys scream at 2x? Sure. We can talk fast. David's got coffee in him, so maybe he'll be going quicker.
Caleb, just going back to those numbers that you were just showing, the sample of 30,000, I wonder, especially on the lower rank, the higher rank items with the lower eScore, how the sample size and the way that you select the samples affected the results, meaning, when you go out and scan items and you see 5 million, 6 million, 7 million, you're not pulling all those items. You're pulling a different price range, right? You're pulling the higher price items. Yep. And so I wonder if those items are still selling the higher price items because demand is naturally suppressed due to the higher price. Whereas for the lower priced, high sales rank, low eScore items, I'm really curious. Have you ever looked into that?
Yeah, so obviously the highest end there only had 12 books listed, but over 10 million. So selling 1 out of 12 at 8% is probably not statistically significant. Would be the term there. So that study we did when we actually released ScoutIQ and explained eScore, that was an even number. So I think it might have been 500, it might have been 5,000. You don't need that many books in your sample size to be statistically significant, according to my brother who knows more than I do about stats. So that's not a real world example. Those are just books, a random sampling of books that have an eScore between 1 and 2, and we just pulled their rank on a given day just to kind of look at the market. My data is a little more useful because it's real world data, although to your point, there is some bias involved because I'm not putting books with an eScore of 1 that have a target profit of $2 that they're selling for $8 or $10 FBA. I'm not putting that in my inventory to begin with because I know that it's going to sit on the market for a while. Pricing could degrade. there's probably less competition, like fewer people are listing it anyway because ScoutIQ is saying to ignore it, versus a book that's got an eScore of 1 but a target profit of $30. I would put that in my inventory, and so would a lot of other people. And so over time, that supply of books goes up theoretically because everybody else scanning with ScoutIQ is going to also get the ding and see that it's an accept, and they're going to list it and compete. So that's a good point.
So like kind of using that as a transition point, one of the things that I think I'm kind of taking from this is really risk is user defined in a lot of ways too. And, I think risk is really determined by kind of the parameters that you set up in your own personal lens. I have a lot of conversations with a lot of sellers who call me and say, "Hey, David, do you think I should move on this load? Like, it's X amount of dollars." And for them, it's a big risk because, again, going back to how much margin do they have, maybe they don't, but maybe it's also beyond margin. Maybe it's also experience and just not having the right information or data. And so just like for them, the unknown is the risk, right? Like it's not necessarily having to put $2,000-$3,000 into a trailer of books, but it's also not having had that experience or enough data to be able to really, I guess, hash out that risk. Does that make sense?
It does. So that's actually a really good segue. Let me answer a question here that someone asked about the data, and then I want to get into some really practical examples because that at the end of the day, it's great to understand this, and if you want to dial in your triggers and adjust things, that's awesome. But I think the reality is, why does risk matter? Well, it helps guide your decision making. So let's get into that. Eric, you had a quick question. Are these data points from high ranked books, FBA? All of those books in my sample there were FBA books. So I try to keep the channel the same. If you guys like the study, that one's probably 2-ish years old, if I recall correctly. Every once in a while I like to go tinker. If you guys want us to replicate it again, we could use David's data. He's got a ton of data. He doesn't sit on books as long as I do necessarily, but we could look at his data, merchant fulfilled, and see if we learn anything different. Of course, the market is going to change as well. So good question there. It's always good to define the terms. So let's talk through risk, David, to your point there. Let's talk through it in a number of different scenarios. And so one thing as it relates to is position sizing. I see Mike Kreider's in the comments as well. He does a lot of day trading. He talks way over my head when it comes to diagonal rolls and all kinds of option type stuff. But he's a smart fellow and he's throwing out big terms like inelastic.
Using big words.
But anyway, Mike's a good fella. He was one of our guests as well, probably episode 5 or 6. I should have a little list of all the numbers because I keep throwing that out. But when it comes to investing in the stock market, the same thing's true of should I buy a trailer load of books? Should I buy a pallet from PalletIQ of pre-scanned inventory? Should I buy out a library that's going out of business? A lot of it depends on how much money do you have. So if you have $500 because your margin's not been very high in the past or you're just starting out, if you only have $500 and somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I have one book that it's collectible and it might sell for $1,000. Here's a couple eBay comps. I have no idea how long it'll take, but do you want to put all your money on one book?" The answer is probably no, because if that book doesn't sell, if it's counterfeit, if there's damage to it, if there's something else that goes on, then you're going to be in trouble. And if you put all of your money, so your position sizing, 100% of your money into one asset or one piece of inventory, now your entire business is hinged or dependent on that one book selling. Now, if you have $10,000 at your disposal and someone comes and says, "Hey, do you want to put $500 into a book that might net you $1,000 and it might sit for 3 months?" The answer might be yes, because from a risk perspective, that $500 is not the end of the road for you. You have access to more funds. And so you can go ahead and do that. So a lot of the questions as it relates to should I ramp up my warehouse? Should I buy that truckload of books? The answer is a little bit dependent. If someone has $500,000 of cash at their disposal and they're wondering if they should throw 20 grand at a credentialed load of material plus freight and whatever else, the answer might be yes. And they can afford to take that risk and test the supplier. And if it works, great. They can put those soldiers to work. If it doesn't, it didn't kill their business. versus someone that has $25,000 and gets posed with the same question, do you want to dump 20 grand into this one inventory purchase? The answer is probably no, because you have to be right. And that's where the house wins. If you're playing blackjack and you're playing $5 hands, which don't exist anymore, they're 10 and 15 and 20. But if you're playing $5 hands and you have $5, you can only be wrong one time. And if you win one time, now if you can be wrong twice. But if you have a pot, a bankroll of $1,000 and you're playing $5 hands, any individual bad stretch of luck or one bad hand isn't going to kill you. So that's why it's important to spread your risk. In our world, that means have a lot of inventory, have a lot of books. The other thing you can do is say, what is the risk that Amazon craps the bed tomorrow or pulls your seller account? Well, if you deem that's a really high risk, or if that would push you out of business, then you should look to diversify. And maybe that means other products on Amazon, or if you think Amazon's the risk, maybe that means learning how to sell on eBay, getting a Shopify store set up, doing your own ads on your own site, for example. So there's lots of things that play in. What are some other scenarios, David, that you've heard of, or Matthew, or if you guys are watching, what are some comments? Like, what are some questions? Let's get into a should I argument. Should I do X? Should I ramp up my warehouse? Should I buy this load? If you have questions that kind of match that, go ahead and drop those, and we'll try and address them and talk through about how it relates to risk.
A super common question I get is, should I hire an employee? Or should I bring on someone else? And I don't know. What do you guys think of that? I feel like the answer is almost always yes, as long as you have a steady flow of inventory and you have a good idea of what you're doing. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It also depends on what type of employment situation you're talking about. Like, you could find someone wanting side work that can help you pick up the pace that you can't do right now, and they're needing a side income. You can provide that. They can work 20 hours a week, whatever it is, versus someone that you're hiring full time that is a family to support, where if you cut off their salary one week, they're done out of the job and you go find something else. You can find someone that's lower risk, I guess you could say, in one way, because it doesn't matter as much to them if for some reason you can't keep them employed, versus someone you're employing full time that has a family to support or something like that. So I know there was next the little warehouse I had in Arizona, there was another warehouse across from me that did online arbitrage and retail arbitrage. They just filled up with Nike shoes and all these random stuff every day. I'd see peaks from their garage door come up and come down, all the new stuff they'd gotten from whatever store was nearby. But the guy that owned it had two homeschool moms that worked for him. When the husband was able to take care of the kids, they'd come in at whatever hour of the day they could and do the work they needed to. They just wanted some side income, and it was easy for him to employ them versus trying to have someone that you have to work full time. And like Caleb said, you have a certain amount of your engine you've got designated every single month that you have to do no matter what. And that completely changes if someone needs 40 hours a week of work and you promise them that, versus someone that can work 20 hours one week and 10 hours the next week, whatever you have to give them type thing. Avery did the same thing with listers. He found listers that didn't need a certain number of hours every single week. They could be flexible and just wanted some extra income on the side. So I think it really would depend on the type of person you're employing. But you have much more experience than I do in this, David, with the people that you've hired. So
it's I was gonna say, you're getting kind of meta there. It's like risk times risk, right? Your risk of the business times their risk of employment. But
that's true.
Well, I think I actually love that. One of the definitions of love is like seeing the other person. And so not to say love your employees, but I think the more that you care about the people in your life, the better it is for them and for you. So yes, it's your risk. What is the risk of raising your engine and having higher costs? And can you keep them busy, but also their risk? And, if you're going to ask them to work full time, you got to talk to, CPAs and understand W-2 versus 1099. There's risk involved if they're operating a forklift. You want to make sure you're covered. So risk can mean different things, from the insurance side of things and making sure you don't bring an employee in that steals from you or takes your computer or takes your inventory, or if there's cash laying around. So you want to think through those things. But in general, the risk is, can this person be with me? Do I trust them? And then, can this person be with me for a while? Does the business need this employee? And so that's kind of where I would look at it. And from a risk standpoint, I think one of the most helpful questions to ask is, what could go wrong? So if you hire an employee, well, what's the worst that could happen? This is a very stoic philosophy, but what's the worst that could happen? Well, they could steal all your inventory. They could steal your computer. They could light your warehouse on fire. I mean, you could get crazy with it in terms of what's the worst that could happen. But in general, it's what's the worst that could happen is you hire them. you become dependent on them, and then they quit out of the blue, and you're left, you have to go back in and work on your own business again. Well, is it that bad? You've been doing that right now before you hired the employee, so that won't kill you unless you're moving on to bigger and better and more valuable things. And if you're worried about that, then how do you mitigate the risk? Well, you build really quality SOP, standard operating procedures, so that when the next person needs to come in, it's much easier to train the next person and kind of speed up that process.
You also, I mean, from a small business standpoint, I think a lot of people that I've talked to have a concern that having an employee, having an additional mouth to feed will take away from the profitability of the business, which is a real risk. It's like, especially when you're small, and let's say you're doing $1,000 a week in sales, hiring that employee may take up 600 of that, but the hope is that you'll go from 1,000 to 2,000 in sales, and they'll be able to generate that marginal $400 for you in profit. Actually, Caleb, like I had a really good conversation with a mutual friend of ours here in Colorado who has had employees in the past, but I checked out their storage place for the first time, and they just had product stacked everywhere. I mean, just like product overflowing. And he was saying he can get X amount of items up a day, and he was just he was like, I really wish I could squeeze a little bit more cash out of it. And immediately, like, my thought was, really, you just need to supercharge your process. You just need to figure out how to do double your work and get all of this inventory up to improve cash flow. And in my mind, the simple solution to that was just hiring someone to help out clear all the products out. But again, like, I could see him like negotiating this in his mind, just like trying to figure out, does he take the risk? And one of the interesting compromises, or the middle ground that we found, I was like, instead of offering a person a full-time job, like, why don't you look for someone here during the summer, or a student, and offer them a guaranteed 1 month, and then try it out for a month. And actually, within the first week, you'll know if it works or not. And it's a way of sort of, I guess, hedging your risk and limiting sort of the exposure that you have. But yeah, I think cash flow is again, when you get into money and like your livelihood, that risk factor kind of gets exacerbated, and it feels way more personal and real, for sure.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts there. For those that know my story, I had a full-time job in marketing, worked for Johnson & Johnson. I started books on the side. I'd kind of dabbled in books in high school from garage sales, and I was the textbook guy in college and helped sell for my friends on consignment, commission, whatnot. But I started on the side. So for those that don't, if you're worried, you can always do something on the side. Well, what if books doesn't work for me? Well, fine. Don't blow up your day job. Keep it. Start on the side. You're going to now de-risk the situation. And if you have margin, this is where the personal finances kind of flow through to the business. If you had margin in your personal finances, and you can set aside $1,000 to get started on your book business, now you've got the cash to then invest in the book business. And if you don't have to start peeling dollars back out to pay for your lattes or your mortgage, you can then start rolling those profits on the business while your personal finances, whether your regular job, is sort of holding down the fort. So that allows you to de-risk. Well, what if books fail? No big deal. You tried it. You learned some skills. You maybe you had a few less weekend nights and weekends with your friends, but you're out there trying something. And best case, what if it all went right? We always like to ask, what if this went wrong? Another way to ask that question is, what if this went right? And try and reframe it a little bit. I know Matthew likes that kind of conversation as well. But now you can do it on the side. And the other part that I try and talk about as much as possible is, what are you after? There's no one right way to run a business. And you've seen with the 10 guests we've had on our first 12 episodes now, because we've done 2 internal ones, the 10 guests have all had really different business models. They're all selling on Amazon. They're all buying low, selling high, right? They're all running a business. They're dealing with numbers. They're dealing with inventory. Some of them are dealing with people, but they're all running different business. And there's literally 1,000 ways to skin that same cat. I hate that analogy, but it came to mind, so we used it. So the question is, what are you after? And that really is the biggest meta question that all of us have to ask. If you're trying to make $1,000 a month because that's what you want to have a little vacation fund, or you want to be able to have a sports fund for your kids or a college fund or whatever. If your goal is $1,000 a month and that's it, there's a lot of ways to get there, but I wouldn't recommend getting into bulk books, getting 6 employees, buying trailer loads of material, and just trying to run a business so that you can make $1,000 a month. If that's your goal, it should just be you, your trusty barcode scanner, and you should just go find inventory and list it because you want to keep your engine running lean and mean and doesn't require a lot of gas. What does it cost to run your business? Well, if it's just you, not a lot. You got some software subscriptions, you've got some hard costs up front, and that's about it. So if your goal is to make $1,000 a month, you should do that as easy as you possibly can. And I would probably not sell a lot of cheap books that are going to net you $1. I wouldn't spin my wheels going after that. I would try and find higher dollar books. I might try and specialize in collectibles, or I'd just try and sell books that have an average sale price of, 17 to 20, ideally a little higher. And I would try and work as minimally as possible to make that $1,000. Now, if my goal is, let's say, hey, I'm retired, my needs are met, my income is met for the foreseeable future. Let's say I'm 60 years old, and your goal is to just provide as many jobs as possible to your community. Well, then you might be okay with making $1,000 a month or making very little, but getting a warehouse, getting 12 employees, buying truckloads of material. And as long as the business can kind of float the labor overhead, you're winning. So what are you after? That determines the decisions. And is it right or wrong if you're trying to make $1,000 a month to do bulk, to do online arbitrage, to buy pre-scanned pallets? There's no one right or wrong answer. It's what do you like? What can you figure out that works, and just move forward and do it. And I think the 3 of us, we have conversations all the time. What if we did things a little differently? I've been at times tempted to just blow the warehouse up, not literally if any insurance people are watching, but just say, hey, you know what? I can best serve the community by really focusing on software. That's where I love to consult. I love to help people with the business. Do I have to be a bookseller as well? I don't have to be. And so those are questions that we ask, because right now I'm going to be dealing with probably finding another warehouse manager. So I've got to go hire and train and make sure everything's in place. And nothing against my current one. He wants to focus more on his own business, which I applaud, I encourage. But there's always going to be headaches. The more moving pieces that you have, the more people involved, the more that your engine burns, the more things you're just going to have to kind of juggle. So those are all kind of things that I look at. What other should I questions come into play?
Matthew, you got any? Your mute's on. Mute's on, Matthew.
Muted.
So I was combing through the comments. I thought I saw something up here that was pretty much a should I question. I'm trying to find where it was.
Gotcha. Let's see. So should I buy this supply? Should I hire my first employee? I think another one is like, should I scale up? And it's like, should I? It comes in many different forms, right? Like, should I buy this piece of equipment, or should I, do this? And Philip, I mean, you and Matthew have seen ScoutIQ take many different stages in business. Like, did you guys have much say though over how much you scale up, or was it mostly user driven?
Well, Matthew's pretty darn good at marketing, so he's helped us acquire customers. Obviously, COVID hurt us quite a bit. People couldn't go to thrift stores, they couldn't go to libraries, and we had a lot of cancellations that really, really hurt the business. And if we were running high and had 10 developers and we were living the high life and running a lot of business expenses and really expensive servers and everything else, that could have killed the business. Yeah. Because we focused, we were fortunate that we had some higher margins. It allowed us to absorb some of those market risks, and we save. We don't pull every dollar back out of the business. We keep a little bit of a safety net in there just in case something happens outside our control. So yeah, again, it comes back to the idea of risk or things being outside your control. I think it's the older I get, the more I realize that very few things are in my control, and that can be scary, and it can make you not want to get out of bed in the morning, or you can just go, hey, you know what? It's working today. I'm going to run with it as long as I can. And that's my mentality toward books. I know that other products work. We've had brilliant people on our podcast that have talked about, ramping into other categories, whether it's media, or getting into online arbitrage or retail arbitrage or you name it. And I think that's great. I know that it's possible, but I choose to keep my head down. My internal mantra is I want to make hay while the sun shines. I live in Indiana, so we can make these farmer references. But the idea is, we want to be able to do that. Romer's throwing shade. Matthew's up 12-0 against everyone for camera quality. 100% agree. Hard to beat the view of
Caleb
nature.
stepped up his background though a lot.
I did, so maybe it's 12-1. Well, I'll throw it out this way. So when you think of what things could go wrong, this will be a little plug. We have a lot of buyers lined up anyway, so we're not looking for buyers. We are looking for suppliers. So if you run a bulk business and are looking to be a supplier and get cash for your books instead of selling on Amazon, or maybe as a way to supplement your Amazon income, reach out. Marketplace at palletiq.com. Marketplace is a way to buy pre-scanned pallets of books. Well, why would a supplier like Dave want to sell his books through it? Well, sometimes he just needs the capital to minimize his risk, to improve his, be less margin, but less risk because you get the money up front. Sometimes he'll take a load of books, scan through it, set aside the winners. We put a valuation on it using a lot of our historical data, and we sell a pallet. So he might sell a pallet through our program for $2,000, and the expected profit on that is going to be another $2,000 or maybe $1,500 of profit. A decent ROI somewhere between 70 and 100% target, and of course, not everything will sell. So that's a program. And if you go, hey, I see this program, you can check it out, palletiq.com. If you want to learn more, again, we have lots of buyers. If you see it and want to fill it out, great, go for it. But we do have quite a backlog right now. Suppliers, we do need you, so please reach out. So if you're going to evaluate whether it's ours or whether someone says, hey, I've got an OA leads list, or here's a piece of software, here's an investment, what you want to start doing to kind of understand risk is say, what could go wrong? Well, I could give the money to this company, and hopefully you know us, you know that we're trustworthy. I could give my money to the company and they disappear and take my money and go away. We've seen some stories of that in the book space, unfortunately, in the Amazon space. It's rare, but it does happen. People put too much trust, especially in new people, and they take the money and disappear. Well, if you pay with a credit card, you can file a dispute. If you pay through PayPal, you can file a dispute. So if you don't trust the person, pay with some sort of plan where you can get the money back. Well, let's say we ship the books to you and they show up and the prices don't match. Well, then you got to lean on, well, what could go wrong? Well, you might not get your money back. Okay. Maybe the condition's really bad. So you have to deal with a little bit of that trust, and you can build the trust by talking to people that have done business with somebody, or you can just take the risk. One thing that we won't do is we don't sell cheaper pallets, like $500 pallets anymore, because it costs, $300 to ship a pallet, sometimes $500 depending on where you're at if you need a lift gate. And spending $500 on freight for $500 of books, it's not really a good investment. So we've started ramping up, and we also try and ask people, like, where are you at in the business? If you want to spend $2,000 on a pallet of books with us, great. We'd love to take the money. We hope it works out. We'll kind of stand behind it. We want you to be a repeat buyer. But if that's your last $2,000, we don't want to sell you that pallet, because there's no guarantee that it works. There's no guarantee that your Amazon account lasts. And the last thing we want to do is to somewhat be even a piece responsible for you going out of business. So those are all things that you just want to think through. And a lot of it comes down to trust. Can I trust the company I'm dealing with? Can I trust that, the credit is not going to come back on me, or they're going to follow through? And then, do I know that the system works? And the less you know about the system, if you're not as familiar with Amazon, start with higher margins. Start with a lower risk, lower investment. That's why books are a great place to start. It's not hard cherry picking to look for books that get 100, 200, 500% return on investment. So spend your time learning the ropes in a low risk situation. Worst case, you spend $500 on inventory. You realize books aren't for you. Your Amazon account never gets fully approved. Okay, you're out $500. You could spend that on a lot of other things. And what if it does go right? Well, now you know the skills involved in running a business, and you can ramp up into other things as well.
Awesome. Well put, Caleb.
Yeah.
Ryder's got some should eyes. I don't know if we want to jump into some of those.
Yeah. Let's just start knocking out some of these questions. Where's
Scott
Dave?
did say, where's Dave's light in your background? He
It's
does have one. It's just a baby light.
Yeah, it's just not. My light's not as big as Caleb's.
All right, let's not go there.
Here, yeah.
Ryder says, should I consider fleshing out a workflow to accommodate a new source where the cost is $40 a pallet, but $120 landed because of shipping, so $80 of shipping? and the bulk landscape appears to have more competitors in the weeds. So I guess, Mike, I know a little bit about your story, but some of the questions you would ask there are, hey, can I afford 12 cents a pound all in? A Gaylor is typically 1,000 pounds, give or take. $120 is 12 cents a pound. That's actually about where bulk material is nowadays, especially on the West Coast where Mike is. So should you do that? Well, can you afford to do it? I know the answer is yes. With your business, you've done quite well, and I know you're smart at saving. So what's the worst that could happen? Well, you're out a truckload or 5 Gaylords or whatever you decide to bite off initially to see if it works. So should you do it? I don't usually, like, the other thing is, what other options are there, right? If I give you $1 and say you need to turn this dollar into $10, could you do that by flipping one book? Yeah. If I give you $1 million and say you need to turn this into 10 million by flipping a lot of books, can you do it? Depends on how long you give me, but that's going to be a much harder scenario to get 1,000% returns with a big spend of like $1 million. It's really easy to get 1,000% returns on $10 a spend. There's lots of ways to do it, not even involving illegal drugs and whatnot, but you can do that. So it depends on what you're after. I don't see a huge reason not to. Do you, Dave?
I with new sources, the only thing you can do is you just have to buy. And, they can tell you it's credential, a shelf pull, it's this, it's that. And until you actually buy it and run through it, like I've just realized that people don't know books. Even people who do books don't know books. And so you just kind of have to buy it, run the numbers. And the crappy thing is, even if it's good, you need to run through 2, 3, 4 loads before you know if they're consistent or not. And so, yeah, bulk is just super expensive. Just finding good sources and keeping them, and not losing out to competitors. He mentioned competitors there. So
he's always game theorying with something.
Yeah, if I would tell Michael, if he's trying to expand, I would definitely do it just to flex your muscles and just kind of get in the practice of expanding your workflow and absorbing more supply. But if you're just trying to do it for a short-term gain, I'd say probably there are easier ways to make money.
Yep. And again, if you can afford it, worst case, you have it's a write-off on inventory. Well, where does it go? Well, you just write it off. But in general, that's not a bad way just to sample things. So we go from Mike, who's been doing it for a couple of years, to Tony, brand new. She says, I'm just getting started and I'm 2 weeks in. So congrats on getting started. A lot of people look at this, kick the tires, and never do anything. So awesome work taking action. Now you're getting into the weeds, and now it gets fun. I'm 2 weeks in of having active listings, have sold only 3 books. I don't know how many books you have listed. It is harder at first, especially if you're FBA. You don't earn the buy box right out of the gate. And so Amazon kind of, I don't want to say cripples you, but it's a lot harder to sell initially, especially FBA. So one, I'd recommend Merchant Fulfilled. Your question is, when should I invest in additional tools like Caleb's fancy tracking spreadsheet, AccelerList, and OA software, online arbitrage software, if you don't know what that means. So the question is, again, Tony, is what are you after? So if you're just getting started, if you have no experience selling, I would keep trying to sell. I would actually pivot. We've got some content on Merchant Fulfilling. David's an expert there as well. But check out Merchant Fulfilling. That'll help you sell books faster until you build a little bit of a track record. You get some feedback, and then you can qualify for the buy box, which will make it a lot easier by a huge factor to sell FBA. And then it's just kind of a question of what are you after? So 47 books active, great. So 3 out of 47 is actually not bad, especially if they've only been active. You said 2 weeks, but realistically, if you say 2 weeks, it might only be a week by the time Amazon transfers warehouses, gets them up and running, etc. So 3 out of 50, 6% sell-through rate isn't terrible for a week. That's actually probably normal. So yeah, I would just keep ramping up. Depends on what you're after. Things like the tracking spreadsheet, they're easier if you get it early, just because once you get out of that, if you actually set it up from the beginning, it's easier. If you're not sure if this is for you, then you can wait. You can always go back and put the pieces together later. That's my accounting philosophy. It gets me into trouble sometimes. Don't talk to my CPA. He hates me sometimes as well. But you can always put the pieces back together. It just becomes more messy. So should you put the dishes away after you eat every meal? Yes, it keeps things cleaner. Is it okay to let them pile up for a couple of days? Yeah, it's not going to be the end of the world. It'll just attract some flies. So it depends on what you're after. How big are you trying to get this? Are you confident you're going to stay with it? If so, can you hack things through by listing through Seller Central? Absolutely. Will Acceler List or Scan Lister or something speed it up and make it easier, more efficient? Yeah. But if you're only at 50 books, do you want to learn the ropes on something new versus just doing what works? I would always optimize toward keeping things small, just hacking through it. You'll learn the ropes. You'll understand how Seller Central works, and you can always upgrade later. And then Nate, this is maybe one we'll end on unless we have something else, but we've been going for about an hour and a half. We want to respect everybody's time. Nate Peterson says, question on margin. Do you sell old inventory at a negative, so negative profit? If so, what is your criteria to sell it off? This is a really good one. It also applies to stock trading. I like to view my inventory as a sunk cost. And there's some new IRS guidelines. Talk to a CPA. I'm not one. If this is bad advice, don't take it from me. But I believe if you're under $10 million in sales, which I believe everybody here is, but if you're over that, congrats. If you're under $10 million a year in sales, you can actually write off your inventory at the time you buy it. So you don't have to apply. You don't have to actually apply and say this book sold and I got $2 in it, so my cost of goods sold is $2. You can write it off at the time that you purchase it. Again, talk to a CPA. Whether that's true or not, I tend to view my inventory as it doesn't matter what I have into it. If I bought this, you can't sell liquor without a liquor license, but if I bought this for $85, which I think is what I paid for it, and I can, let's say I was hoping I could sell it for 120, but now the market's dropped and I can only sell it for 50. Well, should I sell it at 50? Well, I've got 85 into it. If I sell it for 50, I've now lost $35, right? Minus if there's marketplace fees or whatever. Well, the reality is I've got $85 tied up in this piece of inventory. And if I don't sell it at $50 and it continues to drop, I can't take those soldiers back into play and put them into something that's right. So for me, I don't really care. And again, if your margins are high enough and your ROI targets are high enough, it's okay to lose money on some books because you're not going to be perfect. Even my best ranked, best eScore material, I'm selling 90% of it, not 99% or 100%. So there's some things that just don't sell. So should you accept it at a loss? It depends. Does that $50 make a big difference to you? If so, go ahead and sell it. Do you project that it's going to continue to drop in price and maybe go to 40 or 30 or 20 or never sell? In that case, yes, take the money. Or do you think it's a temporary anomaly and it's going to bounce back up? Great. But in general, we tend to hold that. So a lot of times you buy a stock for $100, it goes up to 105. You're like, yes, I was right. And then it drops to 95 and you go, crap. And it starts dropping to 88, 85, and it starts slipping and you realize I'm wrong, right? And one of the mistakes we say is, well, I'm just going to wait till it gets back up to 99 or 100 and try and get my money back. The stock doesn't care where you bought it. It just cares what supply and demand dictate. So a lot of times I would say, yes, it's okay to sell things at a loss. And even if, like, for example, it's going to cost you about 50 cents to dispose of an item now, sometimes more, depends on the weight of the item. But if I'm going to lose 50 cents to dispose of it and it's been sitting in inventory for a long time, I'm okay losing 45 cents to sell it. Even if I sold it at $6.50 prime and I'm going to lose 40 cents on it, that's better than the alternative of paying 50 cents to dispose of it. So you can kind of keep those thoughts in mind as well. And one quick shout out or plug, I got the link wrong when I gave it to David this week, but if you guys want to check out restock.thebookflipper.com, it's a free tool. You can donate if you like. It actually goes back to our developer. So if you want to support him, he's great. He's actually watching. We're chatting in the background here. But restock.thebookflipper.com. This allows you to upload your inventory health report and actually see your inventory. You can see your old inventory, stuff that's older than, say, 12 months. You can see what the current rank is and prices, and you can decide if you want to dump some of that inventory. It'll actually create a removal or disposal order for you. It's really easy for those that are trying to clean up inventory. That's a pretty cool tool. So yes, I will sell things at a loss. David or Matthew, do you have anything else to say on that piece as well?
No, I second what you said. That's one of the most common questions I get as far as repricing and new price goes is people say, how do I factor in my buy cost? If I wouldn't have factored it in, I would have sold it at a loss of $1. But it's like you have $5 sunk into that. So now you're just losing $5 versus making at least 4 of those dollars back. And so thinking of that as a sunk cost when you're buying inventory, I think is important, especially when you're repricing that and figuring out how low you can go. Because a lot of people would set that at 0, their floor profit is 0. So they're selling it or they're disposing of it. Then they lose, like you said, that 50 cents on the disposal fee versus selling it for a 10-cent loss or a 20-cent loss. And so I think that's a big important point when repricing and thinking about inventory is that sunk cost of your inventory.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way too. I like to think of my inventory as like total units or like buckets, and you're using the eScore percentage, right? As far as like you, you mentioned that like eScore is right in the middle of the range. You're selling 40-50%, so 1 out of 2 books, and so it's like assuming you're going to sell 1 out of 2, you're hoping to make the money on 50%, and for the other 50% you don't sell, you're just trying to get rid of it as quickly as possible for as much as you can get, right?
Exactly. And you're going to have some disproportionate returns on the, the right side of that distribution. So you're going to have a couple books that you sell and make, $80, $100 on a book, which is going to offset the books where you lost $1 that you bought in it. So if you have 1 or 2 really expensive books that sell, where you have low buy cost but really high sales price, high profit, that's going to overcome a multitude of sins in terms of stuff that's wrong.
It's just like scratch tickets, if you don't, if you keep buying and you have a chance of hitting that 10 million, you never lose.
Well, I guess that's when you take what could go right seriously and just focus on that instead of what could go wrong as you spend through your money.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we're gonna shift gears. We'll get to the last segment here. I apologize. It seems like a lot of shows we don't get that many questions, and we kind of sit there going, anybody else got questions? This one we talk too much. I see a bunch of questions. I'll try and go back. Matthew, do these live on? Can I see these later and kind of answer them after the fact? You're muted again.
It even gave me notification. Some of these will be on YouTube, some on Facebook, but most of these are on YouTube, so it'll be pretty easy to go back and answer some of these. We can even throw them in a post on Facebook too.
I will come back. We will address these a little bit later. Someone says, is there an eScore cheat sheet? Literally just Google eScore rank Zendesk, Z-E-N desk. You'll see a whole like help desk article that pops up and shows that. We've got content on YouTube as well. Anything else really worth doing? Avery asked a good one. This will be a topic of another discussion. Maybe we need to get Romer on the Books and Bourbon show. We haven't had
him on Books and Bourbon yet. Just on
we're going to have Romer on to discuss the pending recession and what you can do to increase cash flow. And then Brian says, would you consider doing an episode just on ScoutIQ, addressing features, future improvements, enhancements, and suggestions? Happy to do that. We can probably do a private one inside the ScoutIQ group if you'd like. That would be fun as well. So we're going to switch gears. I guess to sum up the entire conversation on risk is you're going to make mistakes. There's risk involved in any business. There's risk involved in buying any piece of inventory. There is no guarantee at the end of the day, unless you have a buyer already lined up, that dollar that you spend is going to return anything. You might have just wasted the dollar plus the labor involved. So once you understand that everything does have risk, it's then trying to quantify and understand, what does that risk mean to me? Can I make that decision? And then all those should I's that factor in. So hopefully you guys took some value. Really challenge you to look at your business, look at your personal finances, check out apps like mint.com, personalcapital.com, as well as others, and really just take a peek at where you're at and try and increase your margin. That margin is going to allow you to have a little more slop. It'll allow you to make decisions. And I do think that the economy is continuing to go down the depression, whatever the phrase is. I think it's going to get worse. And if you have margin now, if you're able to have a side hustle and set aside that money, I think that's going to lead to some pretty tremendous buying opportunities. Well, with that, we're going to get to the last segment, which is real quick, our geek out moment, and then we will wrap things up. So what are you guys geeking out about this week? David, we'll start with you.
Sure. I had the pleasure of talking with publicists for one of the newest, hottest emerging companies here in Denver. And she's been publicist for, done PR for a number of large companies, local companies here in Colorado. And just picking her brain and talked a little bit about creating a personal brand, business brand, and the elements around that, and a few takeaways that I'll share with you guys. Creating a compelling narrative, creating a story that really captures your audience, and making sure it's authentic and relevant to whoever your audience is, and just making sure it resonates with them. And then lastly, if you're doing a press release, just making sure that you tie it around some sort of event. There's like a call to action. And I mean, that's everything in life, right? Like whether it's a web page or a sale or whatever, there has to be some sort of action item or action point or call to action. And so Anyway, that's been my geek out moment, just talking with them, and really, really cool, interesting. Once I learn more, I'll share with you guys.
Awesome. Well, anytime you dig up stuff like that, I'm always excited to hear about it.
Yeah.
Matthew?
Yeah, so this past week, nothing major stands out as a geek out moment, but I do have a future geek out moment. So I haven't been doing the personal. I normally use Why You Need a Budget for my personal finance tracking. Haven't used it for the past few months, and a few things I don't like about that software. So I'm curious what you guys use for tracking personal finance. If you guys could leave in the comments if you have a personal finance tracking tool that you absolutely love. I know there's great ones out there like Mint, and I started going down that rabbit hole a little bit yesterday. Now I'm being bombarded with ads. And there's a whole lot of software out there that I didn't know even existed that looks really, really cool and has some cool features. So whatever you guys use for personal finance, if you absolutely love it, throw it in the comments. I'm going to go back through here and look at some of these comments because I'm looking for something to test out and actually build out for tracking our personal finance. And I'd rather not build out something and figure out it's a terrible tool and move on to something else. So if you've got something you love, let me know in the comments so I can geek out about it this week. And set that new tool up. What do you guys use, Caleb and David? Do you just use a spreadsheet, Caleb, or do you actually use a Mint or something like that?
No, I use Mint for personal. I also use Personal Capital, which allows you to kind of track like all of your like investments as well. So it's not just money in, money out, just from like an income statement standpoint. It looks more at the balance sheet, so I can put like housing and assets and bourbon collection and other things on it, and I can kind of get a feel over time of how your net worth is doing. It does have some personal spending type stuff you can use. I don't love it. I've heard good things about YNAB, so you need a budget. I've never used it. And then for business, I use Wave Apps, which is dual entry accounting because I'm a nerd and love that stuff.
Yeah. For me, I mean, for the longest time, I use Mint. Right now, currently not using anything. And then for the business, we use Zero for just accounting and bookkeeping. And then I always build out, pro formas and projections on just Google Sheets. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should, this is kind of re-inspiring. Matthew, I've been toying with doing like a personal finance channel. It's a crowded space again, but I think it's worth it. Let's do we won't waste the Books and Bourbon on it, but we should do another one. I'm happy if you guys both want to jump in there too. We'll talk about stoplight budgets because I've been toying with a budget for a long time. And there's not really software that does it, but we can do a spreadsheet pretty easily. And I'll talk through that idea as well. So curious if anybody throws good comments. Real quick, what I've been geeking out over is a black light or a UV light all of a sudden my camera decided to lose focus. Sorry. That's not going to come back, is it? There we go. All right. Got far enough away. We got a black light. My son and I went out late last night, waited for the sun to go down, and he struggled with sleep. I'm a bad dad. I let him stay up real late because the sun doesn't go down until about 9:15, 9:30 here. But we went out on the golf course. We have a ton of heather. It's a link style course with lots of like long grass. Some of it's taller than my son at 4 years old. And we took a black light, which makes the golf balls pop. It's really incredible. I've heard this works. One of my neighbors had it. He took his kids out with me, and we went hunting. And so I found that many golf balls out in the weeds, and they found a bunch as well. Impressive. So my son took all the yellow golf balls. That's what he wanted, and I've got some good ones in there I need to clean off. But that was kind of fun, just a little bit of an adventure. It's kind of why I like looking for books. You just don't know what you're going to find, and you're trying to guess. And I kid you not, me and the neighbor talked about building a spreadsheet in terms of where the best places on the course are to look for golf balls. For those that don't golf, typically the badder golf balls or the worst golfers tend to have weak slices. So if you look on the right side of a hole in the weeds at about 180 to 250 yards out, you're going to find top flights and Bridgestones and kind of the lower end golf balls. Better golfers tend to hit it farther. Sometimes they'll still slice, but a lot of times they'll overdraw. And so you tend to find Titleist Pro V1s and Callaway, good balls over on the left side of the fairway in the weeds at about 250 to 300 yards. So that's kind of a fun one to do. We just had a good time going out late last night and playing around. Taught my son what constellations were. We got to lay in the fairway and check out the stars, and that was really fun. So with that, we will sign off. Again, we didn't really have bourbon today, so we'll just do a water cheers and a coffee cheers. But cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. I know this was a little bit of a different show. But I do appreciate you watching, chiming in. Hopefully you found it valuable. We will get back to having guests next week. We got a good lineup coming over the next couple of weeks. If you do have people to recommend, have them reach out. It's caleb@thebookflipper.com or on Instagram @thebookflipper. And with that, we'll catch you all next Thursday. Bye.